Okay, so Douglas, you've talked a lot about uncertainty and managing and measurements now. So could you just summarize what you just described?
Well, there are a lot of things that may seem intangible. In fact, nothing is. Nothing's truly immeasurable. If you can observe it in any way at all, directly or indirectly, as I said during the session, the rest is trivial math. So that's all we have to do. So even the most important things that we have to try to manage, we should measure them. And if we fail to measure them because we believed or we presumed that they were immeasurable, we may actually be costing our organizations or our countries or the world quite a lot, as Ricardo's session just showed.
Yeah.
Right.
And you also mentioned that it's easier to get more data than people mostly think, right?
Oh, sure, absolutely. People are generally surprised at how little data they need for big uncertainty reductions, that in fact the things that you tend to need to measure are the most uncertain things. Well, conveniently, those are exactly the same things that had the biggest uncertainty reduction from the first few observations.
Exactly. So how do you apply that thinking in a project context?
Well, you imagine whatever the decision is. If the decision is about whether or not to approve a project, we can find that maybe something that's highly uncertain needs to be reduced further. The uncertainty needs to be reduced further before we can approve the project. It's very likely that that uncertainty reduction is not going to be related to durations of specific tasks in a project. It's very likely that the big uncertainty reduction that we need to make is about some benefit or some big risk. Those are things that we need to spend more time on.
Yeah, could you apply that to a part of a project as well? So instead of doing an entire project, you can do it in a sub-project?
Oh, sure. Well, a lot of our models that we build have 50 or 100 or more variables. And when we measure things, we may end up measuring only 2 or 3 of those variables out of 100. And that's a typical result. So yes, that's sort of the message, is that we only have to focus on a small subset that causes most of the uncertainty.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that people measure the things that give least value of actually measuring them. Why do you think that is?
Well, we call that the measurement inversion. And the measurement inversion demonstrates, when we go back and look, that people tend to spend more time measuring things that are less likely to influence decisions while ignoring the very things that are more likely to cause them to make a better bet. The reason for it might be because people are used to measuring what they've measured before. They may be more comfortable with certain kinds of measurements. You know, as my quantitative methods professor used to say, if your only solution is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I think Maslow said that first. Well, that's true in general for measurement. If someone's used to measuring one particular thing, that's the first measurement they're going to go to. Well, by its nature, that's already something they're probably less uncertain about. So because they've been measuring it, and therefore would have a lower information value than something you've never measured before. The high information value variables are typically things they've never measured before. Maybe that's why they haven't been measured. They just don't know how to measure them.
Exactly. Also, when you talked about these formulas, statistical formulas that might make better decisions than humans, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, there's been a lot of research on this, and in areas even where humans might presume that they're uniquely qualified to make the best decisions, that there's no way a formula could possibly compete with all their cognitive skills, well, it turns out that in those areas, the quantitative methods actually seem to outperform human beings in a wide variety of tasks. We have an inflated view of our own performance. We all believe we're very good decision makers, and we imagine that we handle simultaneously complex problems with hundreds of variables in our heads. We don't do that. We can't do that. The only way we can synthesize this data is quantitatively. Use another important invention of human beings, mathematics.
So how would you apply that in a project context?
Okay. Well, again, we make our decision model for the entire project. You know, it could have all of the benefits, all of the costs of the project, all the schedule of the project, just a typical business case in a spreadsheet. But now we're modeling our uncertainties about all those input variables. We don't know the productivity improvement that we're going to get exactly. We don't know the schedule exactly. We don't even know whether or not the project will ever finish. It could cancel before we're done. That has happened. Project managers have seen projects get canceled. They know there's a chance of cancellation, and yet they rarely see chance of cancellation on a business case for a project. And that's a significant risk we have to include. So the first thing we're doing is we're building a quantitative decision model for the decision. If the decision is whether or not to approve a project, that's the decision model that I'm analyzing, or the decision could be later on, like particular interventions in a project. Maybe there's an intervention I should make for a failing project. Maybe that's the decision I'm analyzing. Whatever the decision is, I want to model my uncertainty about the relevant variables, and then the things that are high information value, I can gather further observations. Now, statistically, there's a simple way to update our prior uncertainty based on new observations. And that's what measurement's really about. We refer to Bayesian methods in the book. And so I won't get into great detail on that, but it's a relatively straightforward method. And in fact, we've already created, just a list of spreadsheets that people can download for free off of our book website. And that actually does the math for you. So it's not as if they have to master all of these things and go back to graduate school to do this. We make it very simple. We call them power tools. Power tools are simple ways that human beings can solve more complex problems than they're able to do themselves, just like any other power tool.
Exactly. So you also made an analogy between humans, that we are unique and so are projects, but you still can make a lot of inference from them, right?
Right. It's wrong to think that because my project is unique, which it most certainly is, that I cannot extrapolate from other project experience at all. There's a fundamental dilemma when someone does. There's a paradox in that. If somebody says, I cannot extrapolate from other history, but I can still resort to my experience, there's an irony in that statement. Obviously, the experience must also be based on inferences from historical observations, right? So that's the approach that we should take. We should start to say, well, if my experience counts at all, well, then it must be the case that I can make inferences from historical observations, no matter how unique my project is. If you had a really unique project, would you want an experienced project manager on it? Yes. What's the value of an experienced project manager then? He must be extrapolating from historical examples, no matter how different they were.
Thanks a lot for all this.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.